The clock on the wall showed 11:15 p.m. when Officer Derek Matthews pulled his patrol car into the parking lot of the downtown Federal Building. The massive structure stood like a sleeping giant against the dark sky, its windows mostly black except for a few scattered lights on different floors. Matthews had been having a rough week. 3 complaints from citizens, a warning from his supervisor about his attitude, and now stuck with the late-night patrol shift that nobody wanted. He was already in a bad mood when he noticed something that made his jaw clench with irritation. Through the glass doors of the main entrance, he could see a figure moving around inside the lobby. Someone was in there mopping the floors, pushing a yellow bucket on wheels from one side to the other. The person was short, maybe in his 60s, wearing a simple gray uniform and moving slowly, like his back hurt. What the hell? Matthews muttered to himself as he got out of his car. In his mind, something didn't add up. Who cleans a federal building this late at night? The guy looked suspicious to him. Old, clearly Latino from what he could see, and definitely not someone who seemed like he belonged in such an important government building. Matthews had always prided himself on his instincts, though most people would say his instincts were actually just prejudices dressed up as police work. He saw what he expected to see, not what was really there. And right now, he expected trouble. He walked up to the glass doors and banged on them with his knuckles, the sound echoing through the quiet lobby. The old man looked up, startled by the sudden noise. When he saw the police officer, he sat down, his mop, and walked over to the door, moving with the careful steps of someone whose joints ached after a long day of work. "Open up!" Matthews shouted through the glass, his voice muffled but clearly aggressive. The old man pulled out a ring of keys and unlocked the door. "Good evening, officer," he said in accented English, his voice calm and respectful. "Is there some problem?" Matthews pushed past him into the lobby, immediately noticing the strong smell of cleaning chemicals and the wet streaks on the marble floor where the man had been working. "Yeah, there's a problem. What are you doing in here? This is a federal building. You can't just be wandering around in here at night." The old man, whose name was Miguel Santos, reached slowly into his shirt pocket. Matthews immediately tensed, his hand moving toward his weapon. "Easy there," he barked. "What are you reaching for?" "My identification, sir," Miguel said, his voice steady despite the officer's aggressive tone. "I work here. I am the night janitor." Miguel pulled out a plastic badge attached to a retractable cord. It clearly showed his photo, his name, and the words, "Authorized Cleaning Personnel Night Shift." Below that was an official stamp from the building's security office and an expiration date that was still 6 months away. But Matthews barely glanced at it. His mind was already made up. "This could be fake," he said, though the badge looked completely legitimate. "How do I know you didn't steal this from someone? How do I know you're not casing this place for a robbery?" Miguel's shoulders sagged slightly. He had dealt with this kind of treatment before, but it never got easier. At 68 years old, he had hoped those days were behind him. "Sir, I have worked here for 3 years, every night, Monday through Friday. The security guards know me. There are cameras that will show." "I don't want to hear your stories," Matthews cut him off. "Turn around and put your hands against the wall." "Officer, please, I am just doing my job. I clean these floors every night. Check with the building manager if you want. Call the security company. They have records." "I said turn around." Matthews grabbed Miguel's shoulder and spun him toward the wall. The force of it made the older man stumble, his arthritic knees nearly giving out. "Hands on the wall. Spread your legs." Miguel complied, his face pressed against the cold marble wall while Matthews patted him down roughly. Other people in the building had started to notice the commotion. A few late-working government employees came out of the elevators and stared at the scene. Some pulled out their phones, though Matthews was too focused on his power trip to notice. "Please, officer," Miguel said quietly, his dignity intact despite the humiliation. "I am just trying to work. I have done nothing wrong." "You're trespassing," Matthews declared, pulling out his handcuffs. The metal clicked as he clamped them around Miguel's wrists, tighter than necessary. "And I don't like your attitude. People like you think you can just walk into any building and act like you own the place. The racist comment hung in the air like poison. Several witnesses gasped, and one person started recording more obviously with their phone. Miguel closed his eyes and took a slow breath. He had heard worse in his lifetime, much worse, but it still stung. "I have my work permit," Miguel said, his voice barely above a whisper. "In my back pocket. It shows I am authorized to be here." Matthews roughly searched Miguel's back pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. It was indeed a work permit, signed by the federal building's chief of security, clearly stating that Miguel Santos was authorized to perform cleaning duties in the building between 10 p.m. and 6 a.m., 7 days a week. But instead of admitting his mistake, Matthews doubled down. "This could be forged too. You people are pretty good at making fake documents." One of the witnesses, a young lawyer who worked late often, stepped forward. "Officer, I can vouch for him. I see him here every night. He's been cleaning this building for years. His name is Miguel. He's a good man." Matthews whirled around, his face red with anger and embarrassment. "Ma'am, I need you to step back and let me do my job. I'm conducting an investigation here." "An investigation of what?" the lawyer pressed. "A man doing his job? You can clearly see he's the janitor. His card is right there. He has all the proper identification, and multiple people can confirm he works here." But Matthews was too far gone to back down now. His pride wouldn't let him admit he was wrong, especially not in front of all these witnesses. "I'm writing him a citation for suspicious behavior and loitering. Maybe next time he'll think twice before—" "Before what?" another voice called out. This time it was a security guard who had just arrived after seeing the commotion on the building's security cameras. "Before doing the job we pay him to do?" The security guard walked over, his radio crackling with chatter from the main security office. "Officer, this is Miguel Santos. He's been our night janitor for 3 years, never missed a day, never caused any problems. He's probably the most reliable employee in the whole building." Matthews felt the walls closing in around him, but his ego wouldn't let him retreat. "Well, he was acting suspicious. I had reasonable cause to detain him." "Mopping floors is suspicious?" the security guard asked, genuine confusion in his voice. "Officer, with all due respect, Miguel was doing exactly what he's supposed to be doing, exactly where he's supposed to be doing it, at exactly the time he's supposed to be doing it." The small crowd of witnesses had grown larger. Some were taking pictures, others were just watching in disbelief. Miguel remained perfectly still against the wall, the handcuffs cutting into his wrists. He had learned long ago that the best way to handle situations like this was to stay calm and let the truth speak for itself. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Matthews uncuffed Miguel and stepped back. "Consider this a warning," he said, though everyone present knew he was the one who should be getting the warning. "Keep your nose clean." Miguel rubbed his wrists where the handcuffs had been and slowly picked up his mop. The bucket had been knocked over during the confrontation, and cleaning solution was spreading across the marble floor he had just finished cleaning. "Thank you, officer," Miguel said quietly, though his eyes held a depth that Matthews couldn't begin to understand. "I will continue with my work now." As Matthews walked back toward the door, the crowd of witnesses began to disperse, but not before several of them stopped to apologize to Miguel for what had happened. The lawyer handed him her business card and told him to call if he wanted to file a complaint. Miguel just nodded politely and went back to his cleaning. But as he mopped up the spilled cleaning solution, his mind was working on something much bigger than floor maintenance. For months he had been noticing things during his night shifts, strange meetings in offices that should have been empty, people coming and going at odd hours, documents being shredded in large quantities. Tonight's encounter with the racist officer had actually interrupted something important he had been planning to investigate. There was a particular office on the 7th floor where unusual activity had been happening lately. Miguel had been waiting for the right moment to take a closer look. As he watched Officer Matthews drive away, Miguel made a mental note. He would be more careful from now on, but he wouldn't stop investigating. Years of experience had taught him how to move through the shadows, how to see without being seen, and how to piece together information that others missed. The people in this building had no idea who Miguel Santos really was. They saw an old janitor, someone easy to overlook and dismiss. They saw exactly what he wanted them to see. But underneath that humble exterior was a man with skills that most people couldn't imagine. Skills that were about to become very important in the days ahead. Miguel finished cleaning the lobby and pushed his cart toward the elevator. He had work to. 3 hours after the humiliating encounter with Officer Matthews, Miguel Santos was alone on the 7th floor of the federal building. The hallways were quiet, except for the soft squeak of his cleaning cart wheels and the distant hum of the building's ventilation system. To anyone watching the security cameras, he looked like exactly what he appeared to be. An elderly janitor making his rounds, emptying trash cans and wiping down surfaces. But Miguel's movements were more purposeful than they seemed. His eyes constantly scanned his surroundings, noting details that most people would miss. As he worked, Miguel's mind drifted back to a different time, a different life. 35 years ago, he had been Agent Miguel Santos, one of the CIA's most effective operatives in South America. He spoke 4 languages fluently, could blend into any crowd, and had a gift for reading people that had kept him alive through countless dangerous missions. Back then, his specialty had been infiltrating criminal organizations, drug cartels, arms dealers, human trafficking networks. Miguel had spent decades working his way inside these groups, gathering intelligence that helped law enforcement agencies across multiple countries take down some of the most dangerous criminals in the world. He remembered his first big case in Colombia, where he had spent 18 months posing as a low-level courier for a cocaine cartel. The cartel members had barely noticed him, just another middle-aged guy who moved packages from one place to another. But Miguel had been recording everything: names, locations, financial transactions, shipping routes. When the authorities finally moved in, they rolled up the entire network in a single coordinated strike. That had been his strength throughout his career, becoming invisible. People saw what they expected to see, and they expected to see someone, ordinary and forgettable. Miguel had used that assumption against criminals for 3 decades. Now at 68, he was supposedly retired. He had taken the janitor job 3 years ago, partly because he needed the income, government pensions. Didn't go as far as they used to, but mostly because he couldn't shake the habits of a lifetime. He needed to stay busy, needed to feel useful, needed to keep his eyes open for trouble. And trouble, Miguel had discovered, was definitely brewing in this building. It had started small, just little things that didn't quite add up. Certain offices that were supposed to be empty at night, but showed signs of recent activity. Computer workstations that were warm when he arrived to clean, indicating they had been used after hours. Shredded documents in trash cans that should have contained only normal office waste. Then there were the people. Miguel had an excellent memory for faces, and he had started noticing individuals who appeared in the building at strange times. Men in expensive suits who didn't match the government employee profile. Women who carried themselves like they were used to giving orders, not taking them. All of them moving through the building after normal business hours, often using cards that gave them access to areas they shouldn't have been able to enter. Miguel had started keeping a mental catalog of these suspicious activities. Old habits died hard, and his instincts were telling him that something significant was happening right under everyone's noses. Tonight, as he cleaned the 7th floor, Miguel was particularly focused on Suite 714. For the past 2 weeks, this office had been the center of unusual activity. During the day, it appeared to be used by a mid-level administrator in the Department of Commerce. But at night, Miguel had observed different people coming and going, usually between midnight and 3 a.m. He had also noticed that the trash from this office contained unusually large amounts of shredded paper. Not just normal office documents, but high-quality paper that suggested important or confidential materials. Someone was working very hard to make sure certain information never saw the light of day. Miguel approached Suite 714 with his cleaning cart, moving slowly and methodically. The hallway was empty, and the security cameras were positioned in a way that gave him a few blind spots to work with. He pulled out his master key. One of the benefits of being trusted night janitor was having access to almost every room in the building. As he unlocked the door, Miguel felt the familiar rush of adrenaline that had sustained him through years of dangerous work. His senses sharpened, his breathing became more controlled, and his mind shifted into the analytical mode that had made him so effective as an intelligence operative. The office looked normal at first glance. Standard government furniture, filing, cabinets, a computer workstation, and the usual collection of awards and certificates on the walls. But Miguel's trained eye immediately picked up details that others would miss. The computer was still warm, even though the office was supposed to have been empty since 5 p.m. There were coffee rings on the desk that looked fresh, and a faint smell of cigarette smoke lingered in the air despite the building's no-smoking policy. Most telling of all, the paper shredder next to the desk was still warm and contained fresh strips of shredded documents. Miguel began to clean the office, but his real focus was on gathering information. He carefully examined the shredded paper in the wastebasket, looking for fragments that might have survived the shredding process. His fingers, still nimble despite his age, sorted through the strips with practiced efficiency. Most of the shredded material was completely destroyed, but Miguel found several pieces that contained partial information. Numbers that looked like account codes. Part of what appeared to be a shipping manifest. A fragment of letterhead from a company he didn't recognize. More importantly, he found something that made his blood run cold. A partial list of names, handwritten, in Spanish, with dollar amounts next to each name. The amounts were large, 6 and 7 figures, and one of the names on the list was someone Miguel recognized from his CIA days, Carlos Vega, a notorious arms dealer who was supposed to be in a maximum security prison in Mexico. Miguel photographed the document fragments with a small camera he kept hidden in his cleaning supplies. Then he continued his systematic search of the office, looking for anything else that might provide clues about what was happening here. In the filing cabinet, he found folders that appeared to contain legitimate government documents, but Miguel noticed that some of the files had been recently accessed. The papers inside weren't aligned properly, and there were fingerprint smudges on documents that should have been filed away months ago. Behind the computer monitor, Miguel discovered something even more interesting: a small notebook with entries in code. The handwriting was neat and precise, and the entries appeared to be dates and times, matched with abbreviated references that Miguel couldn't immediately decipher. But the pattern was clear. This was some kind of log or schedule. As Miguel continued his investigation, the pieces of a larger picture began to emerge in his mind. The late-night meetings, the shredded documents, the coded notebook, and especially the fragment with Carlos Vega's name. It all pointed to one conclusion that made his stomach tighten with worry. Someone in this building was involved in illegal arms trafficking. And based on the sophistication of the operation and the level of access required to operate within a federal building, this wasn't some small-time criminal enterprise. This was big, organized, and dangerous. Miguel finished cleaning the office and locked the door behind him, but his mind was racing with implications. If arms dealers were operating out of a federal building, it meant they had inside help. Government, employees with security clearances were involved. People with access to sensitive information about weapon shipments, military installations, and law enforcement operations. This was exactly the kind of criminal network that Miguel had spent his career dismantling, the kind of operation that could get people killed if it wasn't stopped. As he pushed his cleaning cart down the hallway, Miguel was already formulating a plan. He needed more information before he could take action, but he also knew he was walking a dangerous line. If the people running this operation discovered that their janitor was actually a retired CIA operative, his life wouldn't be worth much. But Miguel had faced those kinds of odds before. He had survived 3 decades of undercover work by being careful, thorough, and patient. He would use those same skills now. The irony wasn't lost on him that just a few hours earlier, a racist police officer had treated him like a criminal while he was actually in the process of uncovering real criminals. Officer Matthews had been so blinded by his prejudices that he had nearly interfered with an investigation that could prevent serious harm to national security. Miguel smiled grimly to himself as he continued his rounds. Matthews had seen an old Latino janitor who didn't belong in an important building. What he had actually encountered was someone who belonged there more than he could possibly imagine. A man whose job was to find the people who really didn't belong and make sure they faced justice. The building's security cameras recorded Miguel Santos finishing his cleaning rounds at 4:30 a.m., just like every other night. To anyone watching, he was simply an elderly janitor doing his job. But Miguel knew that by tomorrow night, he would begin the most important mission of his life. The next evening, Miguel Santos arrived at the federal building with a renewed sense of purpose. His encounter with the racist officer had been forgotten. He had bigger concerns now. After discovering the evidence in Suite 714, he knew he was dealing with something that could threaten national security. Miguel had spent the day researching the fragments of information he had gathered. Using resources from his old CIA contacts, he had been able to identify the company letterhead he had found. It belonged to a shell corporation based in Panama that was known to be connected to illegal arms trafficking. The partial account numbers matched a pattern used by criminal organizations to move money through offshore banks. Most disturbing of all, he had confirmed that Carlos Vega, whose name appeared on the handwritten list, had indeed escaped from prison in Mexico 6 months ago. According to Miguel's sources, Vega had been building a new criminal network focused on stealing and selling military weapons to terrorist groups around the world. As Miguel pushed his cleaning cart through the building's main lobby, he noticed something that made him pause. Officer Matthews was there again, talking to one of the security guards near the front desk. Miguel kept his head down and continued toward the elevator, but he could hear parts of their conversation. "Yeah, I'll be doing extra security rounds here for the next few weeks," Matthews was saying. "Some kind of special detail. They're paying overtime, so I'm not complaining." The security guard nodded. "We've had some VIP meetings lately. Government officials want extra police presence during their after-hours conferences." Miguel's blood ran cold. Matthews wasn't just randomly patrolling the building. He was providing security for the very people Miguel suspected of criminal activity. The racist cop who had harassed him the night before was unknowingly protecting an international arms trafficking operation. This revelation changed everything. If corrupt government officials were hiring legitimate police officers to provide security for their illegal meetings, it meant the operation was even more sophisticated than Miguel had realized. They weren't just stealing weapons. They were using official channels and legitimate law enforcement to cover their tracks. Miguel continued to the 7th floor, but tonight he had a different plan. Instead of going directly to Suite 714, he decided to observe the building's activity patterns more carefully. He positioned himself in a supply closet near the elevator, where he could see anyone who came and went without being detected. At 11:45 p.m., the elevator doors opened and 3 people stepped out. Miguel recognized one of them immediately. It was the woman he had seen entering Suite 714 several times over the past 2 weeks. She was in her 40s, well-dressed, and carried herself with the confidence of someone used to being in charge. The other 2 were men Miguel hadn't seen before. One was clearly American, wearing an expensive suit and carrying a leather briefcase. The other man was different. He had the weathered look of someone who had spent time in dangerous places, and Miguel's experienced eye caught the subtle bulge under his jacket that suggested he was armed. The 3 of them walked directly to Suite 714, and the woman unlocked the door with a key card. They disappeared inside, and Miguel could see light seeping out from under the door. Miguel waited 10 minutes, then carefully made his way to the office next to Suite 714. This room was used by an accountant who only worked during regular business hours, so it was always empty at night. Miguel had discovered that the ventilation system in the building was old-fashioned, with large air ducts that connected adjacent offices. He unlocked the accountant's office and made his way to the air vent near the ceiling. Using a small screwdriver from his cleaning supplies, he carefully removed the vent cover. The ductwork was just large enough for sound to carry between offices, and Miguel positioned himself where he could hear the conversation happening next. What he heard made his worst fears seem small by comparison. The shipment from Norfolk arrives Thursday night. the woman was saying. 12 crates of automatic weapons plus the rocket launchers your buyer requested. Everything will be off the books. Our people in the Navy have already filed the paperwork showing the weapons were destroyed in a training exercise. The American man's voice was smooth and businesslike. Carlos will be pleased. This is exactly the kind of hardware his organization needs for their operations in Central America. Miguel's hands clenched into fists. They were talking about Carlos Vega, the escaped arms dealer whose name he had found on the shredded document. These people weren't just stealing weapons. They were supplying them directly to one of the most dangerous criminal organizations in the world. "What about the police presence downstairs?" the third voice asked, speaking with a slight accent that Miguel couldn't immediately place. "The officer who's been doing security rounds. Can he be trusted?" The woman laughed coldly. "Matthews? He's perfect for our needs. Completely clueless and happy to follow orders as long as he's getting paid overtime. He thinks he's protecting legitimate government meetings. The man's too stupid and too racist to ask the right questions." Miguel felt a surge of anger but also a grim satisfaction. Officer Matthews wasn't just a racist bully. He was also being used as an unwitting accomplice in a major criminal operation. His prejudices had made him the perfect pawn for criminals, who needed legitimate law enforcement cover. "Speaking of security," the American continued, "we need to be careful about the night staff. There's an old janitor who's been asking questions about why certain offices are being used after hours." Miguel's heart nearly stopped. They knew about him. "Don't worry about him," the woman replied dismissively. "He's just some old Latino guy who can barely speak English. Even if he sees something, who's going to believe him? Besides, Matthews already roughed him up last night." The message was received loud and clear. "Keep your head down and mind your own business." The third man wasn't satisfied. "I still think we should eliminate the potential problem. One old man disappearing wouldn't raise too many questions. Industrial. Accident, maybe. Slip and fall in the wrong place." Miguel's training kicked in automatically. His breathing slowed, his mind sharpened, and he began calculating his options. These people were planning to kill him, which meant he was running out of time to stop them. "Let's see how he behaves over the next few days," the woman said. "If he becomes a real problem, we'll deal with him. But right now we have bigger concerns. The Thursday shipment is our largest operation yet. If we pull this off successfully, Carlos will have enough weapons to supply 3 different terrorist groups." The conversation continued for another hour, and Miguel listened to every word. They discussed shipping routes, bribed officials, bank account numbers, and delivery schedules. By the time the meeting ended, Miguel had enough information to understand the full scope of the operation. This wasn't just about stealing weapons from military bases. The criminal network had infiltrated multiple levels of government: military, officials who could falsify records, customs agents who could clear suspicious shipments, and law enforcement officers who could provide security and protection. The operation was scheduled to reach its climax on Thursday night with the largest weapons shipment yet. After that, Carlos Vega would have enough firepower to launch terrorist attacks across Central America, potentially killing thousands of innocent people. Miguel waited until the 3 conspirators had left the building before making his way back to Suite 714. He needed to gather more evidence, and he needed to do it quickly. Thursday was only 2 days away. Using his lock-picking skills, another talent from his CIA days, Miguel gained entry to the office. This time, he wasn't just looking for random clues. He knew exactly what to look for, and he found it quickly. In a locked desk drawer, he discovered a detailed map of Norfolk Naval Base with specific buildings and storage facilities marked in red ink. There were shipping manifests for weapons that were supposed to be destroyed but were actually being diverted to criminal buyers. Most damning of all, he found a complete list of government officials who were being paid to look the other way, along with their bank account information and payment schedules. Miguel photographed everything, working quickly but thoroughly. He also discovered something that made his blood run cold: a hit list of people who were considered security risks to the operation. His own name was at the top of the list, marked with the word urgent. As he prepared to leave the office, Miguel heard footsteps in the hallway. Someone was coming back and he was trapped. He quickly turned off his small flashlight and hid behind the door, hoping that whoever was coming would just pass by. The footsteps stopped right outside Suite 714. Miguel heard the sound of a key, card being swiped, and the door began to open. Miguel pressed himself against the wall behind the door, barely breathing. Whoever had returned wouldn't be able to see him immediately, but if they turned on the lights and looked around the office, he would be discovered. A man stepped into the office. It was the third person from the earlier meeting, the one who had suggested killing Miguel. He moved to the desk and began gathering some papers, muttering to himself in what sounded like Russian. Miguel realized this was his chance to get more information about the man's identity. Moving as silently as only a trained operative could, he positioned himself where. The meeting took place at 6 a.m. in a small diner 20 miles outside the city. Miguel sat in a corner booth, his back to the wall and his eyes on both entrances. Old habits that had kept him alive for decades. Across from him sat Agent Linda Rodriguez, his former CIA handler, who looked just as sharp and alert as she had 5 years ago when Miguel officially retired. "You look good for a dead man," Linda said with a slight smile as she sipped her coffee. "According to our intelligence, Viktor Petrov's people have been asking questions about how to make a janitor disappear without raising suspicions." Miguel wasn't surprised. "How long have you been watching the building?" 6 months. We picked up chatter about a major arms trafficking operation, but we couldn't identify the location or the players involved. When your name started appearing on intercepted communications, we put 2 and 2 together. Linda spread several photographs across the table. They showed the woman from Suite 714, Viktor Petrov, and several other people Miguel had seen during his nighttime observations. What we didn't know was that our retired agent had already infiltrated the operation as a janitor. That's either brilliant tradecraft or the luckiest coincidence in intelligence history. "A little of both," Miguel admitted. "I took the job because I needed the money and wanted to stay busy. I started noticing suspicious activity about 2 months ago, but I didn't realize how big this thing was until yesterday." Miguel shared everything he had learned: the planned weapons shipment from Norfolk Naval Base, the involvement of corrupt government officials, and the timeline for Thursday night's operation. Linda listened intently, taking notes and occasionally asking clarifying questions. "This is even worse than we thought," Linda said when Miguel finished. "Carlos Vega isn't just buying weapons for his own organization. Intelligence suggests he's planning to distribute them to 3 different terrorist groups operating in Central America. We're talking about enough firepower to destabilize entire governments." "There's something else," Miguel said. "The racist cop who harassed me the other night, Officer Matthews, he's unknowingly providing security for their meetings. They're using legitimate law enforcement as cover for their operations." Linda nodded grimly. "That's their specialty. They identify officers who are either corrupt or easily manipulated, then use them as unwitting accomplices. Matthews fits the profile perfectly: authoritarian personality, racial prejudices, and just smart enough to follow orders without asking too many questions." "So what's the plan?" Miguel asked. Linda leaned forward. "Officially, we need you to extract yourself from this situation immediately. You're a civilian now and you're in serious danger. Unofficially." She paused and looked around the diner to make sure no one was listening. "Unofficially, you're in the perfect position to help us take down the entire network, but it would mean staying undercover for 2 more days while we coordinate with other agencies." Miguel didn't hesitate. "I'm in. These people are planning to arm terrorists. I can't walk away from that." "I hoped you'd say that, but I had to ask. Here's what we know about their security arrangements." Linda explained that the criminal organization had been carefully watching all the building's employees, looking for potential threats to their operation. They had identified Miguel as a possible problem, but they hadn't yet realized that their suspicions were completely justified. "They think you're just a nosy janitor who might have seen something by accident," Linda said. "As long as you can maintain that cover for 2 more days, we can use their own security arrangements against them." The plan was complex but elegant. The FBI and CIA had been working together to track the weapons shipment from Norfolk Naval Base. They knew which vehicles would be used, which routes the criminals would take and where the final exchange would happen. But they needed someone inside the federal building to document the coordination meeting that would happen on Thursday night. That's where you come in, Linda explained. We need proof that specific government officials are involved in this conspiracy. Without that evidence, the people at the top of this operation will claim they were victims of a rogue conspiracy, and they'll probably get away with it. Miguel understood. His job was to gather evidence while staying alive long enough for the authorities to move in. It sounded simple, but Miguel knew from experience that the most dangerous part of any operation was always the final phase, when the stakes were highest and everyone was on edge. There's one more thing, Linda said as she prepared to leave. Viktor Petrov is planning to eliminate you tonight. Our sources indicate he's convinced the others that you're too big a risk to leave alive. Miguel felt the familiar rush of adrenaline that came with knowing his life was in immediate danger. Any ideas on how they plan to do it? Industrial accident during your cleaning rounds. Probably a fall down an elevator shaft or something that could be explained as an old man being careless in a dangerous building. Miguel smiled grimly. They're going to be disappointed. I didn't survive 30 years of undercover work by being careless. That evening, Miguel arrived at the federal building knowing it might be the last time. He had spent the day preparing for every possible scenario, drawing on decades of experience in staying alive when powerful people wanted him dead. He had also spent time thinking about Officer Matthews and the role prejudice was playing in this whole situation. The criminals had specifically chosen Matthews because they knew his biases would prevent him from seeing what was really happening. They counted on him to dismiss Miguel as just another suspicious minority who didn't belong in an important building. In a strange way, Matthews's racism had actually helped Miguel maintain his cover. If the officer had treated Miguel with basic respect and professionalism, he might have asked more questions about why an elderly janitor was working alone in a federal building at night. Instead, his prejudices had made him the perfect, unwitting accomplice. Miguel began his cleaning rounds as usual, but tonight every shadow could hide a killer and every sound could signal an attack. He moved through the building with heightened awareness, using skills he had hoped never to need again at 10:30 p.m. Miguel was cleaning the third floor when he heard the elevator doors open at the end of the hallway. Footsteps approached, but they were trying to be quiet, not the normal sound of someone who belonged in the building. Miguel quickly assessed his options. He was in an open hallway with nowhere to hide and no easy escape route. But he had one advantage. Whoever was coming after him expected to find a helpless old janitor, not a trained operative who had survived encounters with some of the world's most dangerous criminals. Two men appeared at the end of the hallway, moving cautiously toward Miguel's position. One of them was Viktor Petrov. The other was someone Miguel didn't recognize, probably a hired assassin brought in specifically for this job. "Good evening, old man," Viktor called out, his Russian accent more pronounced than Miguel had noticed before. "Working late tonight. I see." Miguel continued mopping, playing the role of an innocent janitor who didn't understand the danger he was in. "Yes, sir. Always much work to do. Big building, you know." Viktor smiled coldly. "Indeed. Very big building. Easy for accidents to happen in a place like this. Old men slip and fall all the time." The two men spread out, trying to get Miguel between them. But Miguel had been anticipating this exact scenario all day. As they moved closer, he suddenly swung his mop bucket in a wide arc, sending soapy water across the polished floor. Viktor's partner immediately lost his footing on the wet surface and went down hard, his head hitting the marble floor with a sickening crack. Viktor managed to keep his balance, but the distraction gave Miguel the opening he needed. Moving faster than any 68-year-old should have been able to move, Miguel grabbed his cleaning cart and shoved it hard into Viktor's midsection. The impact sent Viktor stumbling backward, and Miguel followed up by swinging the metal mop handle like a baseball bat. The handle connected with Viktor's wrist just as the Russian was reaching for his gun. Miguel heard bones crack, and Viktor's weapon went skittering across the floor. "You're not just a janitor," Viktor gasped, clutching his broken wrist. "No," Miguel replied calmly. "I'm not. But I am very good at cleaning up messes." Within minutes, both attackers were unconscious and zip-tied with plastic restraints Miguel had brought specifically for this possibility. He dragged them into a supply closet and called Linda on his secure phone. "Package delivered," he said simply. "2 items ready for pickup." "Outstanding. We'll have a team there in 20 minutes. Can you maintain your cover until Thursday?" Miguel looked around the hallway where his mop bucket and cleaning supplies were scattered from the fight. "Yeah, I think I can manage that. But we're going to need a new plan. They'll know something went wrong when these 2 don't report back." "Actually, that might work in our favor," Linda said. "If they think their people were successful, they might lower their guard for the final operation." Miguel understood. He would have to stage the scene to make it look like Victor and his partner had completed their mission. As far as the criminal organization would know. The trouble. Thursday night arrived with the kind of tension that made experienced operatives check their weapons twice and pray they wouldn't need them. Miguel Santos had spent the past 2 days playing dead, while federal agencies coordinated the largest domestic terrorism bust in decades. As far as the criminal conspiracy knew, their janitor problem had been solved. Victor Petrov and his partner had reportedly completed their mission and left town immediately afterward. The staged scene in the supply closet, complete with Miguel's blood-stained uniform and cleaning badge, had convinced everyone that the old man who had been asking too many questions was no longer a concern. What they didn't know was that Miguel was very much alive and positioned in the building's ventilation system, where he could observe and record everything that was about to happen. At 11:45 p.m., the key players began arriving at the federal building. Officer Matthews was at his usual post in the lobby, providing what he thought was routine security for another late-night government meeting. His racist assumptions had made him the perfect unwitting accomplice. He never questioned why these meetings happened so often or why the participants carried themselves more like criminals than civil servants. Miguel watched through a concealed camera as the main conspirators gathered in Suite 714. The woman who appeared to be in charge, Agent Rodriguez, had identified her as Rebecca Chen, a corrupt Department of Defense official, spread shipping documents across the conference table. "Gentlemen, tonight we make history," Chen announced to the assembled group. "The Norfolk shipment is en route as we speak. 12 crates of military-grade weapons, including rocket launchers and automatic rifles, officially listed as destroyed in training exercises." Around the table sat the key figures in the conspiracy. 2 Navy officials who had facilitated the theft from Norfolk Naval Base, a customs agent who would clear the weapons for international shipping, and Carlos Vega himself, the escaped arms dealer who had been Miguel's target for over a decade. Vega looked exactly as Miguel remembered from their last encounter in Colombia years earlier, a thin man with cold eyes and the kind of quiet confidence that came from years of successfully avoiding law enforcement. He spoke with the same soft voice that had once ordered the deaths of dozens of people. "My buyers are very eager to receive these weapons," Vega said, his accent barely noticeable after years of practice. "The Central American operations have been delayed too long. We have 3 terrorist cells waiting for delivery, and their patience is running out." Miguel felt his jaw clench as he recorded every word. These people weren't just stealing weapons. They were about to arm organizations that would use them to kill innocent civilians across multiple countries. "What about security?" asked one of the Navy officials. "Are we certain there are no more loose ends?" Chen smiled coldly. "The janitor who was asking questions has been permanently dealt with. Victor Petrov's people handled that situation earlier this week. We have no remaining security concerns." Miguel almost smiled at the irony. Their belief that he was dead had made them careless. They were speaking openly about details they would normally have kept secret, giving him exactly the evidence he needed to bring down the entire network. The meeting continued for another hour, with the conspirators discussing shipping routes, bank transfers, and delivery schedules. Miguel recorded everything, building a case that would put all of them in federal prison for the rest of their lives. At 1:15 a.m. the meeting broke up, and the participants prepared to leave for the final phase of their operation, the actual transfer of weapons to Carlos Vega's representatives. Miguel waited until they had all departed, then made his way to the building's communication center. Using equipment that Linda had provided, Miguel sent an encrypted message to the FBI team that was waiting for his signal. The message was simple. Package confirmed. Moving to final location. Green light approved. Within minutes, law enforcement teams across the city began moving into position. The conspiracy had been so focused on their internal security that they had failed to notice the federal agents who had been tracking their every move for weeks. Miguel made his way to the lobby, where Officer Matthews was still at his post, reading a magazine and completely unaware that he had just provided security for one of the largest criminal conspiracies in recent memory. "Excuse me, officer," Miguel said, stepping out of the shadows. Matthews looked up startled. His face went white as if he was seeing a ghost. "You? But I thought they said you were dead?" Miguel finished. "Yeah, that was the plan, but it didn't work out the way they expected." Matthews stood up, his hand instinctively moving toward his weapon. "I don't understand what's happening here." "I know you don't," Miguel said calmly. "That's been the problem all along. You see what you expect to see, not what's actually there." Before Matthews could respond, the building's main doors burst open, and FBI agents swarmed into the lobby. Behind them came Agent Rodriguez and a team of federal prosecutors, all wearing bulletproof vests and carrying the kind of serious expressions that meant someone's world was about to end. "Miguel, are you all right?" Linda called out as she approached. "Fine," Miguel replied. "They took the bait completely. I have everything on video. Names, faces, bank accounts, shipping details, the works." Matthews looked back and forth between Miguel and the federal agents, his confusion evident on his face. "Someone needs to explain to me what's going on here." Linda turned to Matthews with the kind of look that police officers usually reserved for suspects. "Officer Matthews, you've been providing security for an international arms trafficking operation. The people you thought were government officials were actually criminals selling military weapons to terrorist organizations." The color drained completely from Matthews's face. "That's impossible. I was told these were legitimate meetings. I checked with my supervisor. This was an official assignment." "Your supervisor has been arrested," Linda continued, "along with 12 other people in your department who were being paid to look the other way. This conspiracy reaches into multiple levels of law enforcement." Miguel watched as the full scope of his unwitting participation hit Matthews like a physical blow. The officer sat down heavily in a nearby chair, his head in his hands. "The janitor," Matthews said quietly. "You're not really a janitor." "I am a janitor," Miguel corrected. "I'm also a retired CIA operative with 30 years of experience infiltrating criminal organizations. You had it backward. I'm exactly the kind of person who belongs in this building." Over the next several hours, Miguel watched as the full scope of the operation unfolded. Federal agents arrested 23 people, including corrupt officials in the Navy, Department of Defense, Customs Service, and local police department. They seized millions of dollars in illegal payments and prevented enough weapons from reaching terrorist groups to potentially save thousands of lives. The news media arrived as the sun was coming up, drawn by reports of the largest federal corruption bust in the city's history. Miguel found himself in the unusual position of being both a key witness and someone who preferred to avoid public attention. As he was giving his statement to federal prosecutors, Miguel noticed Officer Matthews sitting alone on a bench outside the building. The man looked like he had aged 10 years in one night. Miguel approached him slowly. "Rough night?" Matthews looked up, his eyes red with exhaustion and shame. "I'm probably going to lose my job. Maybe face criminal charges. They're saying I should have known something was wrong." "Should you have?" Miguel asked. Matthews was quiet for a long moment. "Yeah, I should have. If I hadn't been so focused on seeing what I expected to see, maybe I would have noticed what was really happening." Miguel sat down on the bench next to him. "You want to know the truth? Your prejudices actually helped maintain my cover. If you had treated me with respect and asked professional questions, you might have blown the whole operation." "That doesn't make it right," Matthews said. "No, it doesn't. But it's done now. The question is what you're going to do differently going forward." They sat in silence for a few minutes, watching as federal agents continued to load evidence into trucks and criminal suspects into unmarked cars. "I keep thinking about that night," Matthews said. "When I handcuffed you and said all those things, about people like you not belonging here. And all the time you were the only person in the building who actually belonged here." Miguel nodded. "The people who really belonged here were the ones trying to stop terrorists from getting weapons. The people who didn't belong were the ones selling those weapons to terrorists. It had nothing to do with race or language or how much money someone makes." "Will you testify at my disciplinary hearing?" Matthews asked. "I'm not asking you to. Say I was right. I just want someone to tell the truth about what happened." Miguel considered this. Officer Matthews had humiliated him, treated him like a criminal, and made racist comments that still stung. But the man sitting next to him now seemed genuinely remorseful and genuinely interested in learning from his mistakes. "Yeah, I'll testify," Miguel said, "but I'm going to tell the whole truth, the good and the bad. I wouldn't want it any other way."